self-confidence issues forth, and the next night, same time, out comes the cat and bows 3 times, and of course Loren felt so taken by this that he took it upon himself to try to be there every night so that he could give this cat, you might say, that support network, to stroke it, to become all it could be, you might say, as the parlance goes. And he then talks about himself. I am by nature a solitary animal. I don't like crowds. I don't particularly care for gatherings of individuals, and yet I have to make my living. I have my responsibilities to my public. So I guess I'll have to teach. I guess I'll have to put up with giving public lectures all around the country. I guess I'll have to be the person that gives the graduation speech at numerous Midwestern universities. I'll put up with it, with fame, because I also crave it. I need it for my own self-esteem and to grow. As long as the praise exceeds the opprobrium, as he puts it, I will do this. Yeah. And so he sees himself as in a similar vein as the cat, trying to gain approval.
Mm-hmm. And so he develops this ceremonial bow, and then he has a kind of a parable about the ceremonial bow. He said, that's what we're doing all the time anyway. We're just going through these rituals, and it's rehearsed, but it's very well, it's helpful to know that you can always bow ceremoniously and get out of any situation that's uncomfortable. And he cites this situation where he's just given an address at a Midwestern university for commencement, and a lady comes up to him afterward and begins to edge him back toward the edge of the platform, and she's asking him all of these kinds of questions and making all these commentaries on his lecture, and finally she backs him right off the platform, and he sprawls out there on the gridiron. And so what does he do? He remembers Madeline the cat. He gets up and makes a ceremonious bow and retrieves his dignity from the situation. And think about all the times when you have had to have the equivalent of the ceremonial bow. Madeline is really an important individual in the life and times of Loren Eiseley. But not just Madeline, the dog. When he's a nomad, when he's a bum, just traveling around, surviving, living with the other bums on handouts. He adopts this mongrel, and one of the moving scenes from the book is he's on the train now, and the little dog is running along beside him, and the little dog can't keep up, and that's the last he sees of the dog.
And one of his true regrets in life that he carries with him, I think all the way to his deathbed, was that he did not reach down or did not get off that train to go back to the dog. And in the latter part of his life, he always relives that scene over and over and over again. What would my life have been like had I just gotten off that train and stayed with the dog and waited for the next train, perhaps? And to hold on to it, because this animal was his companion. He had as also a horned toad in one of the other little episodes of his hobo life.
But you meet with people who carry a load of guilt because they've mistreated some individual, carried all the way to their grave. Not Loren Eiseley. He carries this load of guilt because he didn't reach out and grab the dog by the tail, maybe, and pull him up on the flat car. And another time he was, of course, one thing we haven't said is that Eiseley is a teacher of anthropology, and a very famous teacher of anthropology and paleontology. But the difference, and he's explored these fossils in Nebraska, but the difference is that he adds a mystical dimension to anthropology, to paleontology, to science. And So we need to be reminded of that, that Eiseley is a teacher, and as a teacher, he's in the gross anatomy lab. Now, because he has to understand the human body as an anthropologist, he's in the gross anatomy lab at the medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, where he later becomes the provost, which is a kind of an academic president, I understand.
Yes, in Pennsylvania.
And so now they bring in the dogs, and here's this dog who, I mean, he knows, these dogs know what's going on. And
this white terrier especially.
Yeah.
And it's,
once again, it's his mystical attachment to dogs. You know, this dog sees the professor coming with the needle, and the dog knows
time not to be chosen.
Yeah, and so the dog looks imploringly to Eiseley
to save him.
And there's another scene for Eiseley's guilt trip. Mm-hmm. He doesn't save the dog.
And it's that one dog that seems to have realized ahead of all the others what was about to happen. And yet he sees Eiseley, and for that instant, the faith of that dog in Eiseley, he looks into his eyes, and instead of escaping to mill around with the other dogs, he freezes and looks into Eiseley's eyes and says, "Can you do something to save me?" And in that instant of freezing himself, he is the one that is captured. And Eiseley carries this also for the rest of his life.
He writes poetically about it. It's elegiac. Oh, the dogs, you know, they think we're God. They think we're God. Don't they? Dogs do, don't they? They think we're gods. Maybe God. And their trust, Eiseley adds, has been enormously betrayed. The trust of dogs has been betrayed. The great tragedy of existence. So a person who relates mystically to animals is going to write differently from a person who relates mystically to human beings, or relates mystically to money, or relates mystically to power, or relates mystically to organization. And Eiseley is a rebel. Eiseley is a maverick. And he's not going to allow himself to be homogenized. He's not going to be, it's never going to be said of Loren Eiseley, the bland lead the bland.
Right. He, in one of his journeys back towards the east, he stops off in Lawrence, Kansas in the rail yard. And it's near dawn, and he looks up at the hills, and he knows, oh, this is Lawrence, Kansas. There's a university here, up at the very top of that hill. Do I want to go see it? He's thinking about that. He says, no, I'm not really interested. I think I'm going to leave, and gets on the next freight out. And by coincidence, once he starts his undergraduate and graduate degrees and completes his last degree with the doctoral dissertation, things are not well in the world again, and he's applying for jobs and pretty well giving up. And sure enough, it's the University of Kansas at Lawrence, which offers him his first teaching assignment, which he takes.
Mm-hmm. His undergraduate work was taken at the University of Nebraska, and naturally, having been born and raised in Lincoln, and one of his close friends while he was a student at the University of Nebraska was Dr. C. Bertrand Schultz. And Dr. Schultz remains today one of the most qualified authorities on the life of his friend Loren Eiseley. And Dr. Schultz, Eiseley pays credit to Dr. Schultz as being the one who, more than any other, including Dr. Barbour, whose name is a legend at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, Dr. Schultz and Dr. Barbour were the ones who motivated him out into western Nebraska, where many of these gigantic creatures that we see over in Morrill Hall were uncovered. And so Eiseley one time said, think of me as a bone hunter. He's out there in the western part of the state uncovering these prehistoric monsters and these variations on the theme of life. That's what turns Eiseley on. He says, I have the honor of never having attended a political rally. He had no time for politics of any kind, including university politics, no time for institutionalized religion, but a mystical attachment to the prehistory of all. You know, there's this book, his later book, his latest, I think his last book, is entitled Darwin and the Mysterious Mr. X. And this is a very interesting conclusion to his work. We should draw attention to some of the other things that have been written about him. Here's a book by Peter Heitman entitled Loren Eiseley, A Modern Ishmael. And it comes from, the title comes from Moby Dick, obviously, where Herman Melville becomes Ishmael, a kind of outsider, a kind of loner, a person who observes without necessarily becoming intertwined and involved. This is a series of sketches of Loren. I doubt if you could call it a biography, but it is a series of sketches on Eiseley's personality. But this one, I think, is worthy. We only have a few minutes left to us now, but this really deserves some time because of Eiseley's studies in the field of evolution and Eiseley's teaching in the field of evolution. Eiseley is a mystical human being, and some people might wonder how a person can be mystical and at the same time be a believer in Darwinian evolution. Well, when you read Eiseley, you get this concept of the creative process expressing itself through evolution. And the thing that surprises you is that Eiseley pays attention to this Edward Blythe. I wonder if you picked up that, that narrative.
Yeah, that was an interesting series of discussions where he's looking at evolution and some of the questions that have been brought up about it, and some of the people who came actually before Darwin and raised issues concerning evolution. It's interesting that Eiseley was originally contracted to write something about evolution, and at the last moment the contract was withdrawn, and he said, well, okay, it's now been withdrawn, I think I'll go back and change the very scientific tone of this paper that I was writing and put a very humanistic touch to it. And that humanistic touch turned it into The Immense Journey, which would become his first book and make him very famous.
That's the book we're going to discuss next month,
right.
6th of October. But in this book, he talks about the extent to which Darwin is indebted to Edward Blythe. And he really rattles the cage of people who think it all depends on Darwin. Because his implication is that Edward Blythe really did much of the substantial homework upon which Darwin built his theory. And that Edward Blythe had accumulated the evidence and the data. And Darwin made his famous tour around the tip of South America, gathering data, studying all forms of life, and then sat on it for 20 years. And was
forced.
finally, he was forced. You could take that either way you preferred to take it. You could say Darwin was a wimp because he had all this data, but he wasn't doing anything about it.